The pounding on the door echoed through Owen O'Malley's cabin like thunder on a clear night, startling him from his fitful sleep, and sending his hand instinctively reaching for the Colt revolver beside his bed. The year was 1876, and in the Montana Territory, unexpected visitors after dark rarely brought good news. "Who's there?" Owen called out, his voice rough from disuse. Since settling on this isolated patch of land 2 years ago, he'd grown accustomed to his own company, preferring the quiet companionship of his horses and cattle to the complications of human interaction. "Please," came a woman's voice, desperate and trembling. "Please help us." Something in that voice, raw fear mingled with determination, made Owen lower his weapon and approach the door cautiously. When he swung it open, the sight before him stole his breath more effectively than any punch to the gut. A young woman stood on his porch, rain-soaked and shivering, with 3 small girls huddled against her skirts. The oldest couldn't have been more than 6, the youngest barely toddling. All 4 were drenched to the bone, their faces pale in the lantern light. "I'm Ruby Jameson," the woman said, her red-rimmed eyes meeting his. "Our wagon broke an axle 5 miles back. We've been walking since sunset. The girls can't go any further." Owen stood frozen for a moment, taking in the bedraggled group. Ruby Jameson was young, perhaps 20 or 21, but her eyes held the weariness of someone who had already seen too much hardship. The 3 little girls all shared her delicate features and auburn hair, though they were so covered in mud it was hard to tell for certain. "Come in," he finally said, stepping aside. "The fire's still going." Relief washed over Ruby's face as she ushered the girls inside. "Thank you, sir. We won't trouble you long. Just until morning." "It's Owen," he interrupted, closing the door against the howling wind. "Owen O'Malley. And trouble's not what I'd call helping folks in need." The smallest girl began to cry, a soft whimpering sound that seemed to pierce straight through Owen's carefully constructed walls of solitude. Without thinking, he knelt down to her level. "Hey there, little one, what's your name?" The child buried her face in Ruby's skirts, but Ruby gently coaxed her forward. "This is Ellie. She's 3. And these are Margaret and Jane. Girls, say thank you to Mr. O'Malley for letting us in out of the rain." "Thank you," the 2 older girls murmured in unison, their eyes wide as they took in the sparse cabin. "You're all soaked through," Owen observed, moving to add wood to the fire. "I've got some shirts you can use while your clothes dry. They'll be big, but they're clean." As he rummaged through his trunk for clothing, Owen stole glances at the unexpected visitors. Ruby was settling the girls near the fire, her movements efficient despite her obvious exhaustion. There was something about the way she cared for the children, tender yet practical, that stirred something in him he thought had died years ago. "Are you headed to Silverpine?" he asked, referring to the nearest town, a good 15 miles further along the trail. Ruby nodded, accepting the offered shirts with a grateful smile. "Yes, we have family there, or at least we hope we do. My Uncle Albert, my father's brother. Father always said if anything happened to him and Mother, we should find Uncle Albert." The implication hung in the air, and Owen didn't need to ask what had happened to their parents. Death was a familiar companion in these parts, whether from disease, accident, or the countless other hazards of frontier life. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply. Ruby's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she straightened her shoulders. "Thank you. It's been 3 months since the fever took them. We stayed as long as we could, but the bank took the farm. There was nothing left for us in Kansas." As the girls changed into Owen's shirts, each one swallowed by the fabric, looking like they were wearing tents, he set about preparing a simple meal of beans and cornbread left from his dinner. It wasn't much, but from the way the children's eyes lit up, it might as well have been a feast. "When did you last eat?" he asked, concerned by how quickly they devoured the food. "This morning," Ruby admitted. "We had some jerky, but it ran out by noon. I thought we'd reach Silverpine by nightfall, but then the axle." "You're lucky you found my place," Owen said. "Not much out this way except my ranch and a whole lot of nothing." "Ranch?" Margaret, the oldest girl, perked up. Do you have horses? Owen couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. I do, 6 horses and about 30 head of cattle. You can see them in the morning if the rain lets up. Can we, Ruby, please? Jane, who appeared to be about 5, joined in the pleading. Ruby gave Owen an apologetic look. We don't want to impose, it's no imposition, he assured her, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Besides, you'll need help with your wagon. I can ride out tomorrow and see about fixing that axle. As the meal concluded, Owen arranged his single bedroom for Ruby and the girls, insisting he would be comfortable enough on a bedroll near the fire. The simple act of preparing his home for others felt foreign yet somehow right, like exercising a muscle long dormant but not forgotten. That night, as Owen lay awake listening to the soft breathing of his unexpected guests, he contemplated how quickly his solitary existence had been disrupted. For 2 years, he'd spoken to almost no one but his livestock and the occasional supply merchant. After what happened in Dodge City, he'd convinced himself that isolation was preferable to the pain of human connection. Yet something about Ruby Jameson and her sister's stirred emotions he'd thought buried forever. Perhaps it was her quiet strength, or the devoted way she cared for her sisters despite her own obvious exhaustion. Or maybe it was simply that for the first time in years, his cabin felt like more than just a place to sleep. It felt like it could be a home. Morning came with clearing skies and the excited chatter of children exploring the unfamiliar surroundings. Owen woke to find little Ellie sitting cross-legged beside his bedroll, studying him with solemn brown eyes. "Are you a real cowboy?" she asked when she saw he was awake. Owen sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I reckon I am." "Ruby says cowboys are brave," Ellie informed him seriously. "Are you brave?" The question caught him off guard. Once he might have answered yes without hesitation. Now, after everything that had happened, he wasn't so sure. "Sometimes," he answered honestly. "Other times not so much." This seemed to satisfy Ellie, who nodded sagely. "Ruby is brave all the time. She scared away a big snake with a stick when we were walking yesterday." Owen found himself smiling at the thought. That does sound brave. He discovered Ruby in the kitchen area, already heating water for coffee and attempting to make sense of his meager supplies. "I hope you don't mind," she said when she noticed him watching. "I wanted to repay your kindness with breakfast, but I'm afraid you don't have much to work with." "Been meaning to ride into town for supplies," Owen admitted, moving to help her. "Not much point in cooking fancy when it's just me." Together they prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal sweetened with the last of Owen's honey. The domesticity of the scene cooking alongside someone else, setting the table for 5 instead of 1 stirred an unexpected longing in Owen's chest. After breakfast, he took the girls to see the horses as promised. Margaret and Jane were immediately enchanted, while little Ellie clung to Ruby's hand, regarding the large animals with a mixture of fascination and fear. "They're gentle," Owen assured her, leading out a placid mare named Daisy. "This one's raised 3 foals. She's good with little ones." Gradually, Ellie's trepidation gave way to delight as Owen lifted her onto Daisy's back for a short ride around the corral. Her peals of laughter drew smiles from everyone, including Ruby, whose face transformed when she smiled, revealing dimples and lighting up her eyes in a way that made Owen's heart skip. Later, as Owen prepared to ride out to recover their wagon, Ruby approached him with determination in her stride. "I'm coming with you," she said, in a tone that brooked no argument. "Margaret is old enough to watch her sisters for a few hours, and I need to see what can be salvaged." Owen recognized the stubborn set of her jaw and knew better than to argue. "Can you ride?" "I grew up on a farm in Kansas," she replied, a hint of pride in her voice. "I could ride before I could walk, according to my father." They set out under a sky washed clean by the previous night's rain. Ruby rode beside Owen on a borrowed mare, her back straight and her hands confident on the reins. Her damp dress had dried overnight, though it remained wrinkled and travel-worn. Yet there was a dignity in the way she carried herself that no amount of dishevelment could diminish. "How long have you lived out here alone?" Ruby asked as they rode. Owen considered the question. "Going on 2 years now. Bought the land cheap from a widow whose husband got himself killed in a dispute over water rights. And before that." He hesitated, uncomfortable with how easily she'd directed the conversation toward his past. "I drifted. Worked cattle drives mostly Texas to Kansas." Ruby seemed to sense his reluctance and changed the subject. "Your ranch is beautiful. Reminds me of our farm, though we mainly grew wheat and corn. Father always wanted cattle, but Mother said they were too much trouble." "They are that," Owen agreed with a wry smile. "Stubborn as politicians and twice as noisy when they're unhappy." The wagon was where Ruby had described, tilted at an awkward angle with one wheel completely separated from the axle. Owen dismounted to examine the damage. "The axle's split clean through," he observed, running his hand along the broken wood. "Must have hit that rock pretty hard." Ruby's face fell. "Can it be fixed?" "Not easily. We'd need to replace the whole axle." Owen straightened up, considering, "But we can salvage your belongings. I've got a cart back at the ranch we can bring tomorrow." As they began gathering what they could carry on horseback, Owen noticed how few possessions the Jameson sisters seemed to have. Some clothing, a family Bible, a few cooking utensils, and a small box that Ruby handled with particular care. "Family keepsakes," she explained when she caught him looking. "Mother's wedding ring, father's pocket watch, things to remember them by." The simple statement struck Owen with unexpected force. What did he have to remember his own family by? Nothing but memories, and those had faded over the years until he sometimes struggled to recall his mother's face or the sound of his father's laugh. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Upon their return, they found the 3 girls playing an elaborate game involving Owen's collection of carved wooden animals' toys he'd made during long winter evenings, to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. "The girls haven't played like this since before our parents died," Ruby said softly, watching her sisters. "They've had to grow up so quickly, especially Margaret." Owen nodded, understanding all too well how loss could force children to abandon childhood. He'd been only 12 when the influenza took his parents, leaving him to fend for himself in a world that had little mercy for orphans. "They're resilient," he observed, "like their sister." Ruby glanced at him, a question in her eyes, but before she could speak, Margaret called out to them. "Ruby, Mr. O'Malley, come see what we made." The rest of the day passed in a blur of domestic activity. Owen realized his cabin had never felt so alive, filled with conversation, laughter, and the constant movement of children. He found himself thinking of ways to make his sparse home more comfortable for his guests, dragging out blankets and pillows long stored away, and even unearthing an old rocking chair from the storage shed. That evening, after the younger girls had been tucked into bed, Ruby and Owen sat by the fire nursing cups of coffee. "We can't thank you enough," Ruby said, her voice soft in the quiet cabin. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't opened your door last night." Owen shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Ruby said firmly. "Not anyone. There are plenty of doors that stay closed to those in need." The firelight caught the copper highlights in her hair, creating a halo effect that made Owen's breath catch. He looked away quickly, disturbed by the direction of his thoughts. "Tomorrow I'll help you load what's left from your wagon," he said, steering the conversation to practical matters. "Then I can take you all to Silverpine to find your uncle." Ruby nodded, though something like disappointment flickered across her face. "Yes, of course. That's very kind." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional pop of sap from the pine logs. "What happened in Dodge City?" Ruby finally asked, her gaze direct. Owen stiffened. "Who said anything about Dodge City? You did, in your sleep last night." Her expression was gentle but unyielding. "You called out a name, Sarah." The sound of that name on Ruby's lips sent a jolt through Owen's system. For a moment, he considered deflection or outright refusal to answer, but something in Ruby's steady gaze made evasion seem impossible. "Sarah was my wife," he said finally, the words feeling rusty from disuse. "She died in Dodge City, childbirth fever, her and our son both." Ruby's hand moved to cover his, her touch warm and unexpectedly comforting. "I'm sorry, Owen. It was a long time ago," he said, though the pain in his voice belied his words. 3 years this coming autumn." "That's not so very long," Ruby observed softly. Owen found he couldn't disagree. Some days it felt like yesterday, other days like a lifetime ago. He'd spent 2 years running from the memories, only to find they'd followed him faithfully to his isolated ranch. "After they died, I couldn't stay there," he continued, surprising himself with his willingness to speak of it. "Every street, every building reminded me of her. So I drifted for a while, then found this place. Figured if I was going to be alone, might as well be properly alone." Ruby was quiet for a long moment, her hand still resting on his. "And has it helped, being properly alone?" The question hung in the air between them, more challenging than she perhaps intended. Had it helped? Owen wasn't sure. The pain had dulled over time, but the loneliness had only deepened, becoming a constant companion he no longer questioned. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "It's simpler, I guess. No one to disappoint, no one to lose." Ruby withdrew her hand, and Owen was surprised by how much he missed her touch. "That seems a sad way to live, Owen O'Malley." "Maybe," he conceded, "but it's safer." Her eyes met his, filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "Is it? Or is it just slower dying?" The words struck him with unexpected force, exposing a truth he'd been avoiding. Before he could formulate a response, little Ellie appeared in the bedroom doorway, tearful from a nightmare. Ruby went to her immediately, scooping the child into her arms with practiced ease. "SHH, sweet girl," she murmured. "It was just a dream." Owen watched as Ruby soothed the child, rocking her gently and humming a lullaby he vaguely recognized from his own childhood. The scene stirred something profound within him, a yearning for family, for connection that he'd denied for too long. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the journey to Silverpine. Owen rose early, preparing the cart and packing provisions for the day's travel. Despite the practicality of his actions, he felt a growing reluctance to see Ruby and her sisters leave. The girls emerged from the bedroom dressed in their now clean travel clothes, their faces washed and hair neatly braided. Ruby followed, carrying their few belongings bundled together. "We're ready whenever you are," she announced, though her smile seemed forced. Owen nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The thought of returning to his empty cabin after they left filled him with a dread he hadn't anticipated. They set out mid-morning, Owen driving the cart with Ruby beside him, and the girls seated in the back among their salvaged possessions. The younger children chattered excitedly about seeing a real town, while Margaret remained quieter, occasionally leaning forward to ask Owen questions about ranching and cattle. "You're good with them," Ruby observed during a lull in conversation. "The girls, I mean. They've taken quite a shine to you." Owen felt a flush of pleasure at her words. "They're easy to like, smart too. Margaret's got a real head for numbers. I saw her counting your supplies yesterday." "She gets that from our father," Ruby said, a fond smile softening her features. "He always said she'd run the farm someday. Now." She trailed off, her smile fading. "Now she'll have other opportunities," Owen finished for her. "Smart girl like that can go far, even out here." Ruby gave him a grateful look. "That's what I keep telling myself. That maybe losing the farm will open other doors for them, but sometimes I worry." "About what?" she sighed, adjusting her bonnet against the sun. "About everything, whether Uncle Albert will take us in, whether I can provide for them if he doesn't, whether I'm doing right by them at all." "You are," Owen said with conviction. "Anyone can see that. The way those girls look to you, that's trust. They know you'll move heaven and earth for them." "I would," Ruby affirmed, her voice strengthening. "I'd do anything for them." The conviction in her voice stirred Owen's admiration. Here was a woman barely into her 20s. shouldering responsibilities that would have crushed many twice her age, yet facing each day with determined grace. As they approached Silver Pine in the early afternoon, the small frontier town came into view, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest. Compared to Dodge City, it was hardly more than a settlement, but it represented civilization after the isolation of Owen's ranch. "You know where your uncle lives?" Owen asked as they drove down the main street, drawing curious glances from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing Owen O'Malley in their midst. Ruby pointed toward the north end of town. "Father said he had a carpentry shop, Jameson Woodworks." They found the shop easily enough, a well-maintained building with a weathered sign hanging above the door. Owen helped Ruby and the girls down from the cart, suddenly reluctant to see them go. "Would you like me to come in with you?" he offered, hoping she would say yes. Ruby hesitated, then nodded. "I would appreciate that. It's been many years since I've seen Uncle Albert. I was just a child last time." The shop was empty when they entered, the scent of fresh cut wood and varnish filling the air. Tools lined the walls, and several pieces of furniture in various stages of completion occupied the workshop area. "Hello," Ruby called. Uncle Albert, a door at the back opened, and a man in his 50s emerged, wiping his hands on his apron. He had the same auburn hair as Ruby, though liberally streaked with gray, and similar blue eyes that widened in surprise at the sight of his visitors. "Can I help you?" he asked, his gaze moving from Ruby to the three girls clustered around her. "Uncle Albert, it's Ruby. Ruby Jameson." Thomas's daughter. Recognition dawned slowly on the older man's face. "Little Ruby. Good Lord, girl, I hardly recognized you. Last I saw you, you were no higher than my knee." His expression sobered as he looked at the children. "These can't all be Thomas's girls." "They are," Ruby confirmed. "Margaret, Jane, and Ellie. Uncle Albert, I'm afraid I bring sad news. Father and mother passed away 3 months ago. The fever took them both within days of each other." Albert Jameson's face fell, genuine grief etching new lines around his eyes. "Thomas gone. Oh, my dear girl, I'm so sorry." "Your father was a good man, the best of men." He moved forward to embrace Ruby, then knelt to greet each of the girls in turn. Owen stood awkwardly to one side, feeling like an intruder on this family reunion, yet unable to tear himself away. "And who might this be?" Albert asked, finally turning his attention to Owen. "This is Owen O'Malley," Ruby explained. "He took us in when our wagon broke down during yesterday's storm. We would have been in dire straits without his help." Albert extended his hand, which Owen shook firmly. "Then I'm in your debt, Mr. O'Malley. Family is everything in this world." "It was nothing," Owen demurred, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not in my experience," Albert said shrewdly. "Now you must all be exhausted from your journey. My house is just behind the shop, nothing fancy, but there's plenty of room for all of you." As Albert led the girls toward the back door, Ruby lingered, turning to Owen with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Will you stay?" she asked softly. "At least for supper." "I'm sure Uncle Albert would welcome your company." Owen knew he should refuse. The sensible thing would be to head back to his ranch before dark, to return to the solitary life he'd built for himself. Yet the thought of saying goodbye to Ruby and her sisters filled him with a hollowness he couldn't ignore. "I'd like that," he found himself saying. "If your uncle doesn't mind." Albert, overhearing, called back cheerfully, "Any man who helps my nieces is welcome at my table, Mr. O'Malley." The Jameson home behind the woodshop was modest but comfortable, with 3 bedrooms and a warm kitchen that showed signs of a bachelor's occupancy, functional, but lacking the feminine touches that Owen suddenly realized had been missing from his own home. While Albert showed the girls their rooms, Ruby moved about the kitchen with natural efficiency, taking stock of supplies and beginning preparations for supper. Owen watched her, struck by how easily she adapted to new surroundings, how capably she tackled each challenge. "You're staring," Ruby observed without looking up from the potatoes she was peeling. Owen felt heat rise to his face. Sorry, I was just thinking how different you are from most young women I've known. Now she did look up, a question in her eyes. Different how? Stronger, he said simply. More substantial, Ruby laughed, the sound brightening the kitchen. Substantial? I'm not sure if that's a compliment, Owen O'Malley. It is, he assured her, moving to help with the vegetables. I've known plenty of women who'd have fallen apart facing what you've faced. But here you are, taking care of your sisters, making plans, moving forward. Ruby's hands stilled, her expression growing serious. What choice do I have? The world doesn't stop turning because we're grieving. The girls need me to be strong, so I am. It's more than that, Owen insisted. It's who you are. Their eyes met across the kitchen table, and something passed between them, a recognition, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a moment, Owen could see a different future unfolding before him, one that didn't involve returning to his empty cabin and solitary existence. The moment was broken by the return of Albert and the girls, all chattering excitedly about their new rooms and the carved wooden toys Albert had made for his grandchildren's visits. Supper was a lively affair, with Albert regaling them with stories of Thomas Jameson's childhood exploits and the girls contributing tales of their journey from Kansas. Owen found himself drawn into the family circle, answering questions about his ranch and his cattle, even sharing a few carefully edited stories from his cattle-driving days. As the meal wound down, Albert fixed Owen with a thoughtful look. So, Mr. O'Malley, what brings a lone rancher into town on a Tuesday? Surely not just to deliver my nieces, though I'm grateful for it. Owen hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Actually, I hadn't planned to come to town at all, just helping Ruby and the girls find you. Albert nodded, a knowing glint in his eye. Well, it seems to me a man with a growing ranch might need help from time to time, especially with spring roundup coming. I manage, Owen said, though the thought of facing another roundup alone was daunting. I'm sure you do, Albert agreed amiably. But there's managing and there's thriving. Way I see it, a man can't do both alone. Owen glanced at Ruby, who was pretending intense interest in her coffee cup, though a flush had risen to her cheeks. I suppose that's true enough, Owen conceded. Later, as he prepared to leave, Ruby walked him to where his cart was tethered outside the shop. The evening air had grown cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Will you come back? Ruby asked directly, never one to dance around a subject. Or is this goodbye? Owen looked down at her, struck anew by her beauty, not just her features, but the strength and kindness that radiated from within. The thought of never seeing her again seemed suddenly unbearable. I'll come back, he promised. I need supplies anyway, maybe in a few days. Ruby nodded, but disappointment flickered in her eyes. For supplies, of course. Owen hesitated, then reached for her hand. Not just for supplies, Ruby, for you, to see you. Her fingers tightened around his. Good, because I'd like to see you too, Owen O'Malley. The ride back to his ranch passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Owen's mind raced with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. The isolation that had once seemed like protection now felt like a prison of his own making. His cabin, when he finally reached it, seemed colder and emptier than ever before. The silence, once comforting, now echoed with absence. He built a fire more out of habit than necessity, then sat before it, lost in thought. On the mantel stood the only photograph he possessed, a faded image of Sarah, taken shortly after their wedding. For 3 years, he'd kept it as a shrine to what he'd lost, a reminder of why he'd chosen solitude. Now, for the first time, he found himself looking at it differently. Not as a symbol of what could never be again, but as a chapter in his life that had ended. A chapter that had shaped him but need not define his future. You always said I was too stubborn for my own good, he said aloud to the photograph. Said someday it would either save me or doom me. The image offered no response, but Owen felt something shift within himself, a loosening of the grief that had bound him for so long. 3 days later, Owen rode into Silverpine with a purpose that had nothing to do with supplies. He'd spent those days in intense preparation, cleaning his cabin from top to bottom, repairing long neglected furniture, even planting a small garden plot that had lain fallow since he'd arrived. He found Ruby at her uncle's woodshop, helping with the books while the girls played outside under Margaret's watchful eye. The smile that lit her face when she saw him enter made his heart race like a green colt's. "Owen, I didn't expect you so soon." "Couldn't stay away," he admitted, removing his hat. "Ranch seemed too quiet without you all underfoot." Albert emerged from the back room, giving Owen a knowing look. "Mr. O'Malley, back already, I see." Owen nodded respectfully. "Mr. Jameson, I was hoping I might speak with Ruby." "And with you, sir, if you have a moment." Albert's eyebrows rose, but he gestured toward his small office. "By all means." Once the three were seated, Owen cleared his throat, suddenly nervous despite the careful speech he'd prepared on the ride to town. "Mr. Jameson, I know it's uncommon to speak so directly after such a short acquaintance, but I've never been one for beating around the bush." He turned to Ruby, whose expression had grown serious. "Ruby, in the few days I've known you, you've awakened something in me I thought was dead and buried. A desire for companionship, for family." Ruby's eyes widened, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I'm not asking for promises," Owen hastened to add. "That wouldn't be fair to either of us, but I am asking for a chance. A chance to court you properly, to see if what I'm feeling might be something you could share." Albert leaned back in his chair, studying Owen intently. "You're right that it's uncommon, Mr. O'Malley. Most would say it's too soon to speak of such things." "With respect, sir, I've spent 3 years hiding from life," Owen replied steadily. "I don't want to waste another day." Ruby's voice when she finally spoke was soft but clear. "Owen, are you certain? The girls and I were a package. They need stability, security." "I know," Owen assured her. "And I'm offering that. My ranch isn't much now, but it could be. It could be a home for all of you." "It already felt like one," Ruby admitted, a smile beginning to curve her lips. "Even for those few days." Albert cleared his throat. "Well, it seems to me you two have some talking to do." "Ruby, girl, what are your thoughts?" "You know I'll support whatever decision you make." Ruby looked from her uncle to Owen, her expression thoughtful. "I think I'd like that chance, Owen, to see what might grow between us." The relief and joy that flooded Owen's system was unlike anything he'd felt in years. "Then I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of it." Over the following weeks, Owen courted Ruby with a dedication that surprised even himself. He expanded his cabin, adding 2 new rooms with the help of Albert, who proved to be not only a skilled carpenter but a willing mentor in matters of family life. The girls divided their time between town and the ranch, gradually transferring their belongings and making the place their own. Margaret took to ranching with unexpected enthusiasm, showing a natural affinity for horses that Owen was quick to nurture. Jane discovered a talent for gardening, expanding Owen's modest plot into a thriving vegetable patch. Even little Ellie found her place, declaring herself the official chicken keeper after Owen purchased a small flock. For Ruby and Owen, the courtship was a time of gradual discovery, learning each other's habits and histories, dreams and fears. They spoke often of their lost loved ones, finding healing in shared grief and understanding. Ruby told stories of her parents and their Kansas farm, while Owen gradually revealed more about his life with Sarah and the dreams they'd once shared. "You think she would approve?" Ruby asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Sarah, I mean." Owen considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said finally. "She always said life was for living, not just surviving. She would have kicked my hide for spending so long hiding away from the world." Ruby laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "I think I would have liked her." "She would have liked you too," Owen said with certainty. "She had no patience for weakness or self-pity, like someone else I know." 4 months after the stormy night that brought the Jameson sisters to his door, Owen O'Malley stood beside Ruby in Albert's garden, exchanging vows before the small community that had gradually become their extended family. The girls stood proudly beside them, Margaret as Ruby's attendant, Jane and Ellie scattering wildflowers along the path. "I never expected to find love again," Owen said as he slipped a simple gold band onto Ruby's finger. "Never thought I deserved it. But you and the girls taught me that the heart doesn't know limits, it just keeps growing to make room for more love." Ruby's eyes shone with tears as she completed her own vows. "You opened your door to us on the darkest night of our journey, Owen O'Malley, and in doing so, you opened your heart. I promise to cherish both gifts for all the days of our lives." That night, after the celebrations had ended and the girls were asleep in their rooms, Owen and Ruby stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, gazing at the stars that had witnessed their unlikely beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked, his arm around her waist. Taking a chance on a broken-down cowboy, Ruby turned in his embrace, reaching up to trace the lines of his face, lines that had softened in recent months, no longer etched so deeply with grief and solitude. "Never," she said firmly. "Some would say we rushed, that we couldn't possibly know our own hearts so quickly. But I think sometimes life brings us exactly what we need, precisely when we need it most." Owen pulled her closer, marveling at how completely this woman and her sisters had transformed his existence. The ranch that had once been merely a place to exist was now vibrant with life and purpose. The future that had once seemed a bleak continuation of solitary days now stretched before them, rich with possibilities. "I love you, Ruby O'Malley," he whispered against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, her voice steady with the certainty that had guided her across the plains and through the storm to his door. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow." As they stood together under the vast Montana sky, Owen reflected that some journeys end exactly where they are meant to, not where we plan, but where we belong. For him, that place was here, with Ruby and the girls who had become his family, in the home they were building together. The broken axle that had seemed like disaster had been, in truth, the beginning of healing. The storm that had threatened had delivered instead the greatest blessing. And the door he had opened reluctantly, that night had led not to temporary shelter, but to a love that would shelter them all for a lifetime.